My name is Adarsh Kasari. I'm a senior systems engineer as part of the EUC group inside of VMware. I'm based out of Atlanta, so I'm traditionally from the AirWatch side of the organization as we've merged the two into this Workspace ONE methodology. What we want to take you through in this particular session is being a power administrator. So console tips and tricks from an AirWatch side. And this is really sort of a look forward towards Workspace ONE and the Workspace ONE methodology as well. Those of you who've been familiar with AirWatch Connect in the past, this is a session that comes up and is rated very highly. So obviously, as we go through the session and when you go around to doing your surveys, please make sure you give us as much feedback as possible because we do want to make sure that you guys get the most value out of these particular sessions. Just the obvious disclaimer up front, some of these features that we are going to talk about are forward-facing, so please stick to your non-disclosure agreements as per required. But really the end result of what we do from an AirWatch perspective is this idea of unified endpoint management. Right. You've got a variety of different endpoints, whether they be desktop machines, laptop machines, mobile devices, IoT devices, rugged devices, Chrome OS. You've got all of these different endpoints running a variety of different operating systems and a variety of different use cases in your environment. And the idea is to unify all of that, have one central place to go in and manage all of these devices, use that as the place for administration, configuration, deployments of applications and policies. So we want to be able to manage all of these devices out of the one platform, and there's some really interesting ways that you have available to you to go in and use the console effectively to best achieve those particular requirements. Now, what we're going to go through in this particular session is being a power administrator. And I want to break it up into two discrete parts. Because things that you can ultimately affect in the console, from an AirWatch perspective and a Workspace ONE perspective, can make your lives easier and can also make your end users' lives easier. So I want to break it up into two separate parts. So the first section is around administrative workflows. We want to go through and talk about what you can do from an admin side to make your experience as an administrator much easier. The other one around end user experience is what can you do in the console to make the life easier for your users? And in many respects, a lot of this is semantics, right? It's how do I make people feel warm and fuzzy about using the solution rather than make them go through about 7 or 8 different steps on top just to make it work. So you'll see that everything in the green on the right-hand side is really related to those end user experience features that you can enable in the console to make life easier for your users. So those of you who attended the quick talk, it was on the Sunday. You would have seen probably 2 of these features that we talked about. But we're going to go through them again, and we're going to go through them in a little bit of detail. The first of them, and the one that we typically see the most common from the pre-sales, the PSO, and the consulting side in the AirWatch organization that doesn't get used very well is grouping. And the reason is people don't understand the different kinds of groups inside of the AirWatch console. So I kind of want to go through and level set. And so for those of you who are using a lot of this, you probably should know all of it, but let me go through a little bit of what I consider as best practices as we go through when we talk about grouping in the AirWatch console. The first of them is what we call organization groups inside of AirWatch. And the idea behind organization groups is this is how we power our multi-tenancy in our platform. So an organization group is a logical separation between certain portions of your AirWatch environment. What it ultimately means is that if you set policies, configurations, deploy applications into one organization group, if the device gets enrolled there, all of your policies and configurations of that group can potentially not affect another group that's of the same organization group level. So think of it as a tree structure. You may have what we call our customer organization group, the top level group, which may be your organization. At that point, you may break out your sub-organization groups into a variety of different options. You can break it out as the structure on the screenshot there has based upon region. You could break it up based upon use cases. You could break it up based upon geographic location. One of the first ones that we typically see is people go customer organization group, prod, and dev. Right? So that way when they go through and do any testing, they can do it in their dev organization group, enroll the devices in the dev OG, make sure they're happy with all the settings and the configuration, and then they can replicate those settings across into the production group and make sure that they're testing it. That way, if they're doing a side-by-side and they want to make sure that they're testing that feature in their existing AirWatch deployment, they can break out with the organization group structure to do that. And the really cool thing around how we do organization groups is you have the option to do inheritance or not. So for example, you set policies at the top level group, like a minimum standard. when you have a minimum standard that gets set down, you can choose to let every group below it just automatically inherit all of those settings, or potentially if you have a subgroup or a specific business unit that needs more secure policies, you can choose to not allow any of those policies to inherit and instead be more strict and secure in that one portion of your AirWatch console. So in the example here, we could say that, for the field sales team, we want to be able to, for them, set a 6-digit passcode, whereas for everyone else in the organization, we want a 4-digit passcode. In that sort of use case there, we can set the 4-digit passcode requirement at the top level at worldwide enterprises and let it inherit all the way down. But for the field sales team, the administrator who might be managing that portion of the AirWatch console can go in and say, I do not want to inherit the settings that have been set above. Instead, I want to be more restrictive. So I have that flexibility in the console, and that integrates quite nicely with the whole roles-based access methodology that we have inside of AirWatch as well. Now, in terms of what you can do with your OGs, you can go crazy, right? So I've had customers do everything from production, UAT, and then go create their business units below it. I've had customers do multi-tenancy based upon geographic regions. Retail's a really nice use case here where they break it up by, for example, by state or by country and store locations inside of there. Ruggedized devices, we typically recommend to put ruggedized mobile devices into a specific organization group itself. So create a rugged organization group and break that out into your stores and your locations. If you're out there trying to test Workspace ONE and move to that method, you also have the ability to use an organization group for your testing and say, Workspace ONE deployment, go through, test your policies, make sure you can do the integration into VMware Identity Manager as part of your Workspace ONE deployment. So there's a variety of different ways you can skin that cat. One customer that I did talk to a long time ago said, yeah, we're going to replicate our AD structure inside of our AirWatch console. I called them brave on the way through because most ADs don't look clean, but to their credit, they've done pretty well with it, so it does work. So organization groups is what is a logical hierarchy in AirWatch. Now, depending upon who you talk to in AirWatch, the next one is either a smart group or an assignment group, or both. I unfortunately still call them smart groups, so that's the way I'm going to make the differentiation. So think of a smart group as an Active Directory group on steroids. Okay? And the reason is because I've got an iPhone right in front of me, but I also have an Android device here. If I deploy a policy or a configuration to me for, let's say it's an iOS profile, I only want it to apply to my iOS device, not the Android device here. But if I deploy it to me, theoretically I've got two devices there and it's obviously going to apply. It's not the most practical to deploy to there, to just me as a user. It's instead, let me go in and actually specifically target the device. So what you can do with these smart groups is create a criteria that takes into consideration the user and the device together as one. So a good example here is the screenshot on the right there. So on the left-hand side of that screenshot are all of your criteria parameters. And on the right-hand side are a live list of devices that are meeting that criteria. So you can see that the criteria, we've actually called it employee-owned iOS devices. So what we've said is, in the criteria list, we're going to say, irrelevant of the organization group, we want the ownership type to be employee-owned devices. Right? So we can go choose the criteria that says, if the device is tagged as an employee-owned device, I want to go in and deploy this policy down. I also want to go target a specific operating system, so I can go, the platform and operating system is iOS, and we're saying, I don't care which version of iOS this is. You can actually get very tailored here, so you can say that I only want to deploy this policy to BYO devices that are running iOS 10 and above. Right? You can't do that with an AD security group. Right? You can say, I want to deploy this to people in the finance group that are running an iOS device that is corporate dedicated, that is running 10.3. So then you can start getting tailored. And on the right-hand side, you get a live list of what's happening on the device, in the device count. So if I was to create another criteria, I may take the number from 115 devices in that group to much less, right? Because I'm getting a little bit more tailored with the criteria that I have. Now, in terms of what you can do from your smart groups, you have the ability to assign these to your policies, and your applications, and your compliance policies, right? So anything that you go in and configure to a device, you can use a smart group as the way to determine which users or which devices get access to those policies. And the cool thing about this is that you don't need one smart group or two smart groups for everything. I mean, if there are specific apps or specific policies, just go create a variety of different smart groups. Get it to reference your Active Directory groups, and if your AD administrators are doing everything through AD security groups, import them into your AirWatch console and make that as part of your criteria for your smart groups, right? So you've got that flexibility for you. Just in terms of some of the attributes that you can use inside of smart groups, AD security groups, organization groups that we mentioned before, different device ownership types, custom AD queries if you choose to do that. But the biggest one that we often see for smart groups especially is device-based criteria. I want to take a specific attribute or a specific aspect of the device and use that as part of my criteria for deploying applications down. Whether it's an ownership type, it's an operating system version, it's a device model. Now, in terms of what you can obviously configure, probably, we've talked through profiles, we've talked through applications. Perhaps probably the most important one is when we go through into the Workspace ONE method and start talking about VMware Identity Manager and Workspace ONE. So you can use the same smart group methodology and apply that inside of Workspace ONE. And with the whole unification of what is the VMware Identity Manager policy console set into the AirWatch console as part of the new release, you can actually go in and manage a lot of your Workspace ONE policies out of your smart groups that you set up in AirWatch. So, nice little consolidated view for you. For those of you who are continuing to use things like AD security groups, keep doing it. They work. That's probably the best way to put it. When you talk about AD security groups, we map the term to what is a user group inside of the AirWatch console. It's exactly the same thing. All right, so you can go to accounts, add, right, for your user groups, and you just go add, and then go do a query to your AD security group. So you'll see here then you can use this as part of your smart group criteria, or alternatively you can actually just use this as the profile criteria itself. So if you just want to deploy it to an AD security group, go ahead and do that. That's the console's flexible enough that when you deploy profiles or deploy applications, you can use smart groups, you can use OGs, or you can use your AD user groups. Now, in terms of your the way you would do this, firstly, you've got to set up the integration with your Active Directory. All right, so you need the VMware Enterprise Systems Connector, or previously known as the AirWatch Cloud Connector, to go in and talk back to your Active Directory. And then you can go sync those groups via an AD query into the AirWatch console, and then from there be able to push that to things like VMware Identity Manager as well. So what we would do from an AirWatch perspective is all of those users and all of those groups that you've made available from your AD to the AirWatch console, you have that ability of pushing that over a REST API to VMware Identity Manager and use those same groups as well for assigning your users. All right, so let's talk about grouping. Let's move on to the next one. And the next one is around automating actions in the console. And my pet hate is people having to not use an optimized process. Right. Things that are taking a couple of extra steps to do, I want to try and help you automate all of that. And the first one that comes up is moves, adds, and changes. People leaving the organization, let's say their AD account gets disabled. There's a whole process that most organizations go through. It might be a ticket through ServiceNow or something, which goes and sets off and triggers a bunch of workflows for a variety of different IT teams to go in and disable access to certain services. From a mobility perspective, this ends up being the AirWatch administrator going, okay, this person has left the organization. As a result, I need to go in and set up the workflows to enterprise wipe their devices and remove all of their corporate data off their device. You can do this automatically if you haven't done this already. So, there's two settings inside of the console here to do this. The first of them is what we need to do is be able to sync the disabled status inside of Active Directory into the AirWatch console. And the second one is to go in and create a default action for what happens when the when the user account comes up as disabled or inactive. So you see here that we have automatically sync the disabled status, and then from there we want to go for an enterprise wipe of enrolled devices for that user that is disabled. We can go in and make that the default action there. So what that means is when someone in Active Directory gets disabled, it automatically triggers an enterprise wipe of all of their devices. Not a full device wipe, so we're not getting rid of their personal photos or music or anything like that. It's all of the corporate stuff that you push out of AirWatch gets automatically removed as part of this process. Right. one less step and one less thing that you have to worry about because someone else is ultimately managing the Active Directory. We can automate all of those actions out of the AirWatch console. The next one is automatically syncing AD security groups. Right? So typically when you do this, you may add in a group up front. Say it might be a test group or a new AD security group that you're looking to onboard and use that as part of your AirWatch deployment. And then next week, for example, 500 more users get added to that AD security group. Turn on that feature, please, which is the auto sync with directory and auto merge changes. I can't stress how many times that always gets missed and people just add a group in and go, oh yeah, it'll all work fine. And then next week when those 500 users get onboarded, they're like, well, this profile hasn't been pushed out to 500 people. Like, yeah, because you haven't synced from directory. You've just done a one-time sync. So make sure auto merge changes and automatically sync with your directory is turned on. It works off a scheduler. It's a polling interval. So it'll poll Active Directory for any changes in that group, and it will take those changes and automatically replicate that to the AirWatch console. So if you onboard those 500 people into that AD security group, automatically they will be reflected in AirWatch. All of the profiles assigned to that smart group where that AD group is assigned to, they'll automatically get that update. So can't stress that one enough. Again, it's another one of those automated actions because if you didn't do it and you get the call saying that 500 people haven't got this profile, you've got to go into the console, click on the group, add missing users, and then trigger the sync, right? So let's make this automatic. Let's do this without you having to put any work in. The third of them that I want to talk about is compliance policies. Again, well known, not very well used in my experience. And the idea behind compliance policies is, what do I do to a device when it doesn't meet the security policies that I set up? If the device is not meeting my standards, do I want to take a heavy-handed approach or a less heavy-handed approach, depending upon the violation? And the key thing there is every violation is a bit different. If I don't have a passcode, I would argue the user can go in and remediate that themselves. So take the heavy-handed approach as the very last resort. They jailbreak their device, well, that's a different story. Right? Someone's got a jailbroken device, you may go through and say, you know what, you're too much of a security issue for my liking. As a result, I'm going to warn you and then immediately remove your access to certain things. You have that flexibility. Now, one thing I can't stress enough here is the thing that's written in best practices there. The best practice is that you create one rule and multiple actions. Do not create multiple rules in the same compliance policy. Because if you do, you are anding those rules. Right? They are not ors. If you want an or, create two compliance policies. Okay? If you put them in the same compliance policy, you are anding your rules. On the other side, your actions, go create as many actions as you want. Right? One rule, multiple actions. Unless the two rules are directly related, which I've yet to find a proper use case for it, and I will buy someone a beer if they can find me the right use case for two rules in the same compliance policy. So here's an example. All right, so the compliance policy there, and apologies to the guys at the back, it might be a little bit harder to read, but I'll go through it. Okay, so the one rule we've created here, but more importantly from an actions perspective, you have this idea of tiered actions. So you can go in and set your default action on the device, and the first default action is immediately perform the following action, which is mark the device as non-compliant. So tell AirWatch that that device is not trusted, and I do not want to consider that device the same as all of my other devices in my fleet. What we're also going to do, and in that first box of 3 items there, is 3 actions that we're going to take simultaneously. Right. So the first one there is notify. We're going to send an email to the user via their email address that we've synced into the AirWatch console. We're also going to do, sorry, there are 4 actions there. We're also going to do sending an SMS. We're also simultaneously going to do sending a push notification to the device that says your device is non-compliant, tell them the reason for the compliance violation and what they can do to remediate it. And then also we're going to request a device check-in just to see if the status has changed of that device. So in this case, we might be doing a lot of notification up front. This might be someone not having a passcode. Right, let's notify them. Let's give them as much time for them to go remediate it themselves. Because the passcode violation is easy to fix, but has a significant impact if you don't have a passcode on your mobile devices. Right? On iOS, that enforces things like encryption. But then the next box down, sort of the second one there, is what do I do as my next escalated action? So we're saying that after an hour, and we're also going to repeat that action 2 times. So we're going to say we want to do that middle section and that middle method twice. And we're saying we're going to also notify the user. We may also CC an administrator or a manager at that point. So you're saying this person's been out of compliance for an X amount of time. Let me go in through and notify some people about it. But then I might go in and install a compliance profile. Maybe it is I want to go in and remove a certain function available to them. Maybe if they're getting access to a mission critical application that needs per application VPN, you may want to turn off the VPN access because their device is compromised or is seen as non-compliant. So you have a lot of flexibility there around the settings that you can do. And then, for example, we've taken a slightly more heavy-handed approach towards the lower one, which says that after a day, we want to go through and block managed applications from being deployed to the device. And maybe if we're really critical about it, we might start blocking access to email. And I can guarantee you that will get people back into compliance, right? The moment you get rid of their email or you send off an enterprise wipe command, people go, my stuff's not working anymore. Let me go through and look at what's going on my device. So you have the option of being light-handed with your actions or extremely heavy-handed, or tier them as we've got here. And this is a typical structure that we should see. So what's the best practice there is obviously one rule, multiple actions, but an analysis of what actions you want to take based upon different violations. And it varies across organizations. Right? Certain industries want to take the heavy-handed approach up front, and that's okay. Right? The console's flexible enough for you to go in and do that. So the third of these is around reports and analytics. And those of you who went to yesterday's session around Workspace ONE intelligence, and those of you who've been very familiar with AirWatch in the past you would have been a little frustrated with the AirWatch reporting. And the aim of Workspace ONE intelligence is to grab your monitoring information and make that available in the AirWatch console in a really effective manner. Right? So it's really around 3 areas. The first of them are around insights. You have one place to go and get all of your reporting for your entire Workspace ONE environment. So it's broken out across both AirWatch and VMware Identity Manager as part of Workspace ONE. You'll get all of that. You'll also be able to query your environment and query a bunch of different parameters that you have available to you. And those of you who saw the demonstrations yesterday, there's a significant amount of data in the AirWatch console that's not traditionally exposed through the old reporting method. So we're hoping as part of this whole Workspace ONE intelligence method that you have that ability to get all of the information you want, create your custom queries, create your custom dashboards in the console to do it. It also gives you things like the rules engine, so you can go automate your processes based upon your environment. You can go do a detailed analysis of what's going on in your environment and use that as the way to get your metrics for creating your compliance policies or additional profiles as well. So just in terms of what you can get out of this whole Workspace ONE intelligence method. So this is the new version of what we're doing in reporting. So obviously we've got a variety of different updates and inside of this particular monitoring section around Windows patching. So a variety of different metrics that we're pulling out of a standard report, but you'll notice at the bottom right there's an empty square. Right, so that is for me to go in and go mine for certain data and make that available to me in my Workspace ONE monitoring console. Things that actually make sense or are useful to me. So I actually want to go in and choose a template, and we have a whole bunch of pre-canned templates, or alternatively, my favorite one is the blank one if you can find the right field, right? Because you'll be sitting there going through like 1,000 or 2,000 fields, and it's all part of the fun, but we have some pre-canned ones. So the idea behind this is you don't have to start all the way with all of the information, then go find what you want. You can take a template that may be 75, 80% of what you want, and then go feed in the extra bits of data that make that report most relevant to you. So what we're going to do here, we're actually going to look for a Windows-specific widget here. And the widget is, we want to get the update status for a specific KB. Say this is a mission critical patch that we have to go in and deploy to our entire Windows fleet from our AirWatch console. So we can say that we want to go in and choose that particular template as our basis. We can go from there, and we can go and create our additional filters or get any additional data that we need from there. So you see here that we have the filter says the platform equals Windows. We're going to say that we want to get the Windows status. That comes already from that template. And then we have the additional filters of the KB patch that we wanted to look for. We can go put in a specific patch. We can go add in a subset of them as well. So you can say, because in this case we want to make sure how many devices have got this particular patch, we're going to go in and target this particular patch and then go choose how do we want that data to be displayed. Do we want a chart so we can go in and screenshot that, give that to our management? Do we want to make sure that we just get all of this as just a list out of information or a variety of different contexts? So you can choose how you want this chart to be delivered, time and date, when do you want this to be listed out, and your scheduling of all of these particular widgets and reports. And you'll see down at the bottom right now, we now have that information being populated into this Workspace ONE monitoring dashboard. Right, so everything that you set up as a widget and then what you set up in your reporting, you can go take an existing template, choose whatever data you want, add additional criteria, and go from there and use that as the way to get your reporting. So there's probably going to be a significant amount of enhancements as this product continues to mature as well. So, next one. Perhaps the coolest one, although I've yet to find a lot of AirWatch administrators that decide to administer their entire console via REST API. I've met two. So, the REST API. This is really good for those of you who have third-party integrations, say third-party products or things that you build internally that use AirWatch-based workflows. So for example, if a device gets enrolled in AirWatch, it needs to trigger off a process in another application. Say it's to provision access to another service, or for another service to provision something inside of AirWatch. Say it might be, I need to deploy this application, and when I deploy the app out of the AirWatch console, I want to use that as the way to go configure that application service, maybe talking out to a third party. The cool thing is the RESTful APIs inside of AirWatch are very flexible, and you all have access to it from your AirWatch environments. So those of you who have a SaaS tenant of AirWatch, it's DS, your server URL, and then /API/help. That will give you the reference guide for all of the APIs. So you'll have all of the post and the get API commands available to you. From there, you've got a whole bunch of configuration items. So things like your MDM settings, your mobile email management settings, and also some of your MAM policies that you would deploy through AirWatch that you could do through the console. You can do them via the REST API. In addition, you've got things like system configuration. So one of the nice ones that we typically see is a whole bunch of contractors get onboarded. Use the REST API to go in and onboard them as local users inside of AirWatch. Say if they don't need an AD account, right? Why go in and create them all manually through the console? You can just use the REST API to do that. So we see that as a nice way to automate some of the console actions, especially if things are being done in bulk. And the cool thing around what we do with this is we've extended the same framework for APIs into Workspace ONE. So this is the VMware Identity Manager API reference. Okay, so this is also public. If you don't get that link, just go to VMware Identity Manager API, do that via a Google search and you'll be fine. You'll find it. And so what you've got inside of here is the same reference guide for doing your automated actions inside of VMware Identity Manager as part of that Workspace ONE deployment. So things like your administrative tasks, say adding a whole bunch of users or modifying an entitlement for your applications. Your OAuth settings, you can do that as well through here. Any of your user configuration settings as well, you've got that access to do. And your device registration, so the integration between AirWatch and Identity Manager and being able to pull that information about how many devices have been registered to use the Workspace ONE application. You can feed that data into your other workflows based upon the information you get from the RESTful APIs inside of VMware Identity Manager. So you can build all of your custom workflows based upon the APIs that are available to you via public reference in both AirWatch and Identity Manager. And this one is truly public, so you can just Google for your AirWatch one. When you go to the API help site, it will prompt you for authentication into your AirWatch console. So once you authenticate, you'll have the reference guide available to you. So everything on that list there was administrative functions to make administrators' life easier. What we're going to sort of do is change tracks, and this gets a little bit more outside of what you do to make your life easier and more about your end users. So the first of them is around automatic ownership, and not a fan of ask the audience questions, but I'm going to do it. How many of you guys use like DEP? All right, cool. What about Android Enterprise or Android for Work? Okay, we've got significantly less. What about Samsung Knox Mobile Enrollment? All right, a couple more there. Windows 10 out-of-the-box enrollment. Okay, cool. Mac OS DEP? I know Christian does. So, for those of you who aren't, and there's a few of you here, these automatic enrollment options and automatic ownership options are made by the operating system manufacturers to make your life easier. So those devices that are typically corporate owned, corporate dedicated, you can use these automated ownership types to help you roll these devices out much faster. And the cool thing is most of these developers and these operating system manufacturers, and a good example here is Apple. When you go through and manage their devices using the device enrollment program, you open up a variety of different APIs that you don't have in the consumer version of the operating system. Right? So you have on iOS, they're typically supervised APIs, and those supervised APIs are only there for devices that Apple tags as a corporate dedicated device, which for the most part is anything that goes through the device enrollment program. So when we go through and talk about DEP is really cool on how it gets set up. Integration between the Apple device enrollment program management console and the AirWatch console. It's very easy to configure through the AirWatch console. We've got a wizard steps you need to do. What you can do is define your settings as part of that enrollment workflow. So you can say that when a device gets onboarded through DEP, what settings do I want to disable from the startup screen? Do I want to turn off the ability to do location services or turn it on by default? Do I want to grab the crash statistics and analytics, or do I want to make that available to the user? Do I want them to be able to enable or disable Siri? You can go customize that onboarding process and customize the screens that the user sees as they go in and onboard the device. What that means from a staging perspective is you don't have to go through and IT has to take the device first and then put in the Wi-Fi password, enroll the device, and then give it out to the user. Instead, in this case, when you use DEP, power the device on, connect it up to any public Wi-Fi, and then all of a sudden the device will get the DEP configuration that's being pushed out of AirWatch through the DEP profile to the device. So your configuration times go down significantly, and those, a lot of organizations in the retail space use DEP quite a bit when they're going in and putting devices in new stores, because they can just use DEP, put it on the Wi-Fi network inside of that store, and it immediately boots up, enrolls inside of AirWatch, and all it prompts for is, if you need, a user authentication. So it's a really consumer-like setup. So things that people set up in their personal lives, they'll be able to do it with their DEP-enabled devices. At the very worst, you will prompt them for an AD credential to get access to the device once they've enrolled, because it will push the agent, push the configuration profiles down. And of course, you've got full management of that from the AirWatch console. So you'll be able to see your DEP-enabled devices, you'll be able to see your DEP configurations, you'll be able to apply different DEP configurations to different organization groups as well. So if you've got a specific use case where a specific DEP profile gets pushed down with certain applications, do it for a certain organization group, and then create another DEP token that allows you to go in and configure another organization group with a subset of different settings. So you've got that available to you. So DEP, there's been some significant enhancements on the Mac OS side as well as part of the last release for DEP. So thoroughly encourage you to look at DEP if you haven't looked at it before. It is our recommended model for managing corporate dedicated iOS and Mac OS devices. Android Enterprise is it's one that's gaining a lot of traction. Google have spent the last year marketing Android Enterprise as the way to go in and manage your Android devices going forward. And Google's approach on this has always been Android Enterprise is the right way to go for both corporate dedicated and BYO use cases. And the reason for it is that with Android Enterprise, you have this idea of a work managed profile. Right? Your work managed profile is your work delivered applications in what is effectively a sandbox on the device. Now that sandbox could be the entire device. right? If it's a corporate dedicated device, you may choose to make your work profile the entire device. Or in a BYO context, you may only make it a sub-portion of your device. The cool thing with AirWatch and Android Enterprise is we have a very simple and effective integration between the two. Those of you who've played with what it was called previously Android for Work in the past realized it was an absolute nightmare to set up. As part of the optimization of the process that Google has done and alongside with us, it's become a very simple process from the administrative side to set up, where all you need to do is provide your specific Google account, and using an API that we have with Google, we actually do all the configuration on your behalf. So you're not having to go in and copy tokens from one to the other, create an OAuth token in the Google console and make that available. Instead, it's a very simple integration between the two. From a user perspective, it's very simple. The user goes in, onboards their device. When they go turn it on, they go type in the AFW # AirWatch. And then they get prompted for their Google account. At that point, we'll actually just put in something like a group ID registration, and then you get that device enrolled. Right? So it'll point them at the right AirWatch environment and enroll their device. Alternatively, if someone's already like a BYO device at that point, all they need to do is go to the agent, they go type in their email address, and the agent will prompt them for the Android Enterprise setup, right? And it will set up the work managed profile for their device. So it's a very simple workflow. It looks exactly the same as an enrollment workflow, albeit with a screen that comes up as orange and says, setting up your work managed profile, and go through the steps of doing that. So very simple. What that means ultimately from your perspective is when you deploy an application, it sits in the work managed profile on the Android device. So you've got the full containerization of those applications. They reside within the managed context, and you can share applications data between each other that are only in that context. So you've got some flexibility around the work managed profile. And some of the other interesting things that you do from an Android Enterprise perspective is, being able to put a specific pin code on the work profile for things like BYOD. There are some use cases out there where people want to be able to turn off access after 5 p.m. for their employees to their work stuff. You can put a pin code on their work managed profile. So there's some interesting flexibility that you get with Android Enterprise over traditional Android. So Google are out there talking about this as the right way to go for all Android. So if you're working through a deployment of Android devices or looking to expand that, consider putting Android Enterprise in as well. The good thing is, all of this can be set up in specific OGs. So remember what I was telling you around prod versus UAT? If you're going to test Android Enterprise functionality, put it in a UAT group, make sure you're happy with it, make sure you've got the process down pat, and then move it across to your production settings. Right, so you've got that flexibility based upon the inheritance and the multi-tenancy inside of the AirWatch console. Knox Mobile enrollment. Lesser used, predominantly Samsung customers, of course. This is an additional layer on top of Android Enterprise, for example. This is obviously for Samsung devices and the optimization of the startup process and enrollment process for Android devices that are from Samsung. So the idea there is to automate that end user experience, that enrollment process, so they're not having to do as many clicks to go through, get through the operating system setup, go to the Play Store, download the agent, and go through that enrollment process. So streamlining that staging process because you're making a connection between the Knox management service back to AirWatch, and then also helping you through making that process easier from a user perspective. So the workflow that a user goes through once you've set up the integration from an AirWatch console perspective, they go turn on the device, connect it up to a Wi-Fi network, it'll go through the onboarding wizard, and then they get a pop-up immediately for things like the mobile enrollment profile. They accept the end-user licensing agreement from AirWatch, and then their device is enrolled because we grab things like the serial number and match that back to the user inside of AirWatch. So very simple integration that you need to do from the console perspective. Again, there's a wizard-driven interface as part of the Android setup to make that possible as well. So lots of different enrollment options and optimization options. I didn't put a slide in around Windows 10 out of the box experience, but for those of you looking at Azure Active Directory domain join machines, you can use the out of the box experience, and the demonstration in the showcase on Monday went through that, where someone unboxes a device, it says join to my Azure AD domain, they type in their email address, we do an email-based auto discovery, redirects from there to AirWatch and Workspace ONE if needed, authenticates the user, sends a SAML assertion back to Azure to enroll that device. right? So at that point, you're onboarding the device before the user gets into the operating system. So there's a lot of really interesting optimizations that you can do. And for things like Knox Mobile Enroll and parts of Android Enterprise and especially the device enrollment program, that's more a corporate dedicated use case. We're starting to see with things like out-of-the-box enrollment for Windows 10, it really goes either of two ways. Right? We're starting to see things like BYO adoption using the Cloud Azure AD domain join method as well. So there's a lot of flexibility around how you can optimize that experience. So next one, enrollment customization. This one's cool because I've spent forever talking about BYOD. I've been doing this for like 7 years talking about BYOD, and everyone seems to do it to a point where everyone's happy with it or it just fails miserably. It kind of ends up one of two ways, is what I see. And the biggest thing that we've done from a Workspace ONE perspective, and as you move towards Workspace ONE, is the idea of adaptive management. And unfortunately, I got to go back to go forward here. If you look at your traditional AirWatch deployments, in order to get a user access to an application, which think about how they do it in their personal lives. I can get my iPhone here, go to the App Store, search for the app, and click it. What do I have to do from my enterprise perspective? I have to go through and download the agent, enroll my device, accept the management profile, accept that my company is going to remotely trust and manage every single thing on my device because that's a restriction that Apple sets. Then the device gets registered. Then the catalog application gets pushed down. Then I can go click on it. Then I get a push notification. Then I get the app. It's not the most seamless process. So we've changed that whole thing with Workspace ONE. And the idea is, let's just give people their apps. We'll aggregate them in one place. But based upon the application security requirements that you set up from an AirWatch perspective or from an identity management perspective, deny access to those applications based upon the current posture of the device. So if I'm a BYO device and my company knows nothing about it, I could go to the Workspace ONE app, authenticate, and see all of my apps. And say at that point I want to go in and get an application that does need that additional level of security. I'm going to prompt the user for, this is why I need you to up-level the trust of your device. I'm going to give you that app, but I'm going to say, but the only way for you to get access to that application is step up the level of trust of your device. And that's what you see there in that middle screen there, which is enabling that workspace services. Right? So you're being clear to your users that in your current state, we can't give you access to this application. We give people privacy notifications, and I've got a slide on that in a moment. This is really cool. This is one that is the biggest hurdle to BYOD, and the challenge that I typically find is, as much as you think that this is the case or not, people don't trust IT. Right? Most end users go, I like my company to an extent. I know that they might do something that I don't particularly like. So one of the things we built around privacy is, firstly, the privacy console inside of AirWatch. And the cool thing about how we do privacy in AirWatch and the whole privacy application is whatever you set in the console is immediately reflected for the user. So if you change something in the console, say today you are not tracking GPS data on the device, but tomorrow you are, you immediately alert the user that their privacy has changed. Right? So they're not having to do this one-time agreement. And that's often been the challenge with things like a terms of use. Because a terms of use is a one-time agreement that people see up front and then will accept it at that point and go, okay, I either am going to do it and I'm all in, and whatever happens from there, I've accepted my terms of use, or I'm going to opt out of this program. With this privacy method, the user can go in and check their privacy whenever or if ever anything gets changed by the administrator in the console. It will alert the user. And of course, clearing up common misconceptions, because the first of them is, you're tracking my text messages. You're tracking my photos. Right? These are the things that people think that AirWatch can do that the MDM protocol doesn't allow you to do, but being very clear and concise to your users about it. Once you've done that, once the user's accepted the privacy requirements, we're going to go through and install that management profile. And the key thing I want to make a difference here inside of Workspace ONE is the idea behind the Workspace ONE management profile is, while it looks like an MDM profile and probably is an MDM profile, we have turned off one API. The one API we've turned off is the ability for the administrator to do a full device wipe. right? Because in a BYO context, the last thing you want to be doing is getting into those compliance and legal violation problems of you accidentally happening to wipe someone's device on the way through and removing all of their personal photos. So we've turned that off via our API. So that's the key difference between what we're doing in Workspace ONE and what's traditionally from an AirWatch perspective with those devices. So if the device is tagged as employee owned, we turn off the API to do a full device wipe. Once you've done that, the user gets a notification saying that the device is now trusted. They can get access to those applications. Any of those apps that were potentially requiring them to step up their trust of their device, they'll now have access to and they'll be in a position to use. Just going back to that whole user privacy thing, groups and settings, all settings, devices and users, general privacy. The other way, because I never remember that, is just use the search bar inside of the console. It's one of those things, just type in the word privacy and it comes up immediately. The cool thing about privacy is you can configure this per ownership type. So you can say that potentially I want to set different privacy configurations for corporate dedicated versus personally owned devices. I can alert people of their privacy there. Say this for me is a BYO device, but if I had a corporate dedicated device, I can have 2 privacy applications, 1 on each of them, and have 2 different privacy configurations set up to me based upon the ownership that's been set up inside of the AirWatch console. And then, of course, you can go in and alert your users of what is being collected, what is not being collected, and go put your own verbiage around how you can help them, whether it be contact a HR department or a legal department or go talk to the service desk or IT. Right? You can go put your own verbiage around that so your users are well and truly aware of how their privacy is being managed on their devices and what they can do if anything changes. The last one is slightly more traditional to AirWatch, but works inside of Workspace ONE as well. And it's the idea of customizing things like your terms of use. We see terms of use as probably the front-end step before enrolling devices. Those of you who've done this a lot through AirWatch go through the enrollment process, and before they get the management profile pushed down, they have to accept this terms of use in the console. Go in and tailor your terms of use. Right, it's groups and settings, all settings, devices and users, general, enrollment, terms of use. You can set up different terms of use, right? You can go create multiple terms of use templates, and we've got a whole bunch of them that are pre-canned in the console, and then you can use that as sort of like as a baseline, or if there's something that you already have created, put that inside of the AirWatch console. The key thing is if you're going to put a terms of use, make sure you enable that it is a required acceptance, otherwise your terms of use is not really doing a huge amount at that point. So make sure that you set up your terms of use for having users to accept that terms of use at that point, and then also set up different terms of use depending upon the organization group or the division that someone's in. Say you may have a different terms of use for finance versus manufacturing versus human resources or engineering. So different OGs can have different terms of use. So you don't have to be generic and blanket across all of it. You've got the flexibility in the console to set up different terms of use per organization group as well. The last 2 are really user-centric features. I haven't even got the reference to where they are in the console. This one comes up quite a bit, is branding. And I can safely say most AirWatch administrators brand their own AirWatch console so they can see it and make sure that they see the right things in their own color schemes and know it's their organization that they're logging into. So you've got the branding settings inside of the AirWatch console to the administrative portal, but also some of those applications that you use. So a good example of that is the Content Locker application. You can modify the branding in the SDK settings to put your own color schemes on there or your own icons and logos inside of the Content Locker app because it's got our SDK embedded in there. So you have those branding settings available to you, and you can ultimately make sure things like the self-service portal for your users is customized and branded so they know that they're going and logging into a portal that is approved by you and looks like your own color schemes. The cool thing is we've done this across Workspace ONE as well. So as part of Workspace ONE and things like VMware Identity Manager, you have the same branding settings available to you. So on the same Workspace ONE experience, the user can go download the Workspace ONE application from the App Store. They'll type in their email address. It will redirect them to their specific tenant, and they will be able to see their customized branded organization. So they know that they're going to be logging into a portal that is work approved and they've got the right color scheme on there. So you can do things like the console branding, but also how it looks for the end user. And one of the cool things is you would have seen that demonstration around mobile single sign-on and how that whole workflow of you start with a mobile application like a Salesforce or an Office 365, and we do some really cool things in Workspace ONE to do the single sign-on. As that workflow is going through, there's a little window that says Workspace ONE is signing into your environment. You can brand all of that. So instead of it saying Workspace ONE is signing in, put it in as your company. You can go make sure that it's like we're trying to sign you in and make people feel warm and fuzzy about how they're getting access to their applications. Brand that user portal so they know that they're getting a corporate or an enterprise app store, right? So you want to make sure that they have that experience available to them. Last one I've got there, and it's just a slide, is self-service. And with Workspace ONE and AirWatch, we've got a variety of different self-service methods. When you look at Workspace ONE, the catalog is your self-service for your applications. So you can go one place to get your apps. But what about if you want to self-serve your own devices? Say I have 5 devices here and I want to see the status of them. I left one in the back of a taxi and I want to go through and manage them. I can go through and log in to the self-service portal. Again, you can brand all of that, right? So you can make sure it's your own color scheme and your own logos. A user can go in and see all the devices that they have, and from there they can go in and administer certain functions on their own device rather than potentially putting in a help desk ticket or calling up the service desk to make that happen. So things like locking the device or putting a notification on the device, pushing down a specific profile or forcing an enterprise wipe if I left that device in the back of a taxi. And for example, depending upon the APIs you make available through things like the device enrollment program, you may have certain functionality made available to your corporate dedicated devices versus your employee owned. So you may have the ability of doing things like sending a sound notification or locking it to administrative mode. That's a nice little supervised API that Apple released, which is if the device is tagged as a corporate dedicated DEP device, you have the ability of putting an administrative lock on the device. So as long as the device can connect out to the internet, an administrator can put an additional lock on top that says, all right, if the device is found, please return here, and then the administrator has to put in a lock code before the user is allowed back in. Right? You can do some of that using the self-service portal and also be able to do that from the console. But the idea behind this, making sure users can administer the basic functions themselves. They want to onboard a device, they can use the self-service portal. If they want to remove a device and give that device to their children, they can go enterprise wipe, remove all the corporate data, make sure the organization doesn't know about it, and happily give that device off at that point. So, just to wrap up, a couple of different workflows there. We talked about things that you can do from an administrative perspective to make your life easier, things you can do from a console perspective to make your users' life easier across AirWatch and Workspace ONE. Now, if you like what you see, there's a lot of really cool resources on My AirWatch. If you haven't got access to it, just go through and sign up. Go to My AirWatch. There's a sign up link, and then we can just map you out to your organization. There's a whole bunch of KB articles of interesting little tidbits, tips and tricks, community forums of functions that people have found in the AirWatch console or optimized workflows that people have. So highly recommended. You can use the AirWatch, the My AirWatch portal to go through those knowledge base articles and find everything that you need. Just in terms of some of the other sessions we have, we've got a whole bunch of sessions around unified endpoint management and secure app and access management over the next couple of days. Not to toot my own horn, but I've got one at 2 o'clock this afternoon if anyone wants to hear me again. Now we're actually going through a troubleshooting and best practices guide for Workspace ONE. So it's going to be an interesting little session, but Naveen's got a nice session on Mac management for those of you who are looking to deliver Mac OS devices into your environments. But there are also really cool sessions around MAM and MDM, around Workspace ONE and identity management, as well as email troubleshooting and compliance. So there's some really interesting ways. The other session that's really cool is, so Robert Coggins is actually from our VMware IT. So if you want to learn about how VMware went about implementing their AirWatch environment and their Workspace ONE environment, highly worthwhile going to that session, learning about what we did, the pitfalls that you need to go in and avoid, and how you can go deploy your Workspace ONE environment. So with that, thank you guys very much. Surveys, please. We thoroughly appreciate the feedback, and have a great rest of your day.